That's exciting.
Yeah, so that was a hole in the motor, and here we've got a ripped off sway bar end link. Fourth gear has left this plane of existence, and oh yeah, and we destroyed one wheel. Yeah, it was an expensive weekend. Let's get into it. A little over a week and a half ago, I went down to Barber Motorsports Park with the normal race team, and we also had Ben from Gears and Gasoline with us. That was a really fun weekend. Pushed the car pretty hard. We actually made it all the way to first place, but most of the weekend we spent in third place. And frankly, short of some mechanical failures by some other people, we would not have made it to first place, and those people ended up not having mechanical failures. But this car basically, on Saturday, Friday it ran beautifully, Saturday ran beautifully, and then about an hour into Sunday, this happened, which thankfully, there was actually, because there was church hours on Sunday, there was a break, so we were able to make sure that this wasn't an issue, change tires. The MR2 actually has pretty good traction even without sway bars. It just leans a lot harder and it wears through tires a lot quicker. But we only had 5 hours left to go, so no big deal. Then a couple hours of racing later, we end up losing, I think about 3 hours worth of racing later, we end up losing fourth gear. And I'm really curious what that is, because we can still get in fourth gear inside the cab, like there's a gate there. But there's no power transferred. Like, it's in fourth gear right now, and I pushed it into the garage. It's just, there's no friction at all. So maybe we've stripped all the teeth off one of the gears. I don't know. That's what we're here for today, to find out. Yeah, so that took us to about 3 hours into the last 5 hour session, and then about an hour later, that hole developed into the block. So we ended up, it was about 45 minutes from the end of the race. We just had to pack up. I mean, there's no way with 45 minutes left, even if I had brought a motor, that we'd be able to replace it, and a transmission too. So anyways, it was an absolute blast. I'm always nervous when I bring a new driver on the team. And in this case, Ben was actually an amazing driver. And in fact, we had a whole lot of fun. You might see him again at some point. But I'm not going to bother bringing you guys any footage from the race. Ben and Luke, actually, Luke was there also. He had 4 or 5 cameras running at all time. I don't know how many terabytes worth of data he's got to have to comb through. I'm glad it's not me that's doing the editing. But, there's going to be a link there, a link in the description to his video. If this gets released before, you might have to come back a little later to see the link. But yeah, enjoy that for actual footage of the race. And this is going to be probably a bit longer video. So here's some timestamps. This is when we're going to take a look at the suspension. We're going to take a look at the transmission and the engine. All right. Let's take care of the simple one, the suspension. So the suspension, as you saw earlier, we ripped off a sway bar end link. Barber is funny. There's this part here. Well, here, let me show you. This right here, this is a high-speed carousel, a right-hand carousel. And then right at the end of it, we're doing about 75 miles an hour. And there's a dip, and you get all the traction in the world right at that dip. So you pull the steering wheel even harder. And as a result, we've actually got contact. You can see up here, see how there's a wear spot. It's hard to see, but we're actually wearing a tiny little bit on the brake line, which is very concerning. Thankfully, it's just rubber, but you see there's a hole there. That's because this whole piece here, that hits up here, and that wore through. So we've never had a wear spot there. In fact, if you look at the other side of the car, you can see there's no such wear spot. So at a minimum, when we go to Barber, we're going to need a taller ride height. And also, of course, you probably didn't miss the fact that that also exploded. Now, thankfully, this new axle solution, it's actually, these axles are actually still in great shape. We might need to replace some parts. There's a little bit of play, especially on the inner. I don't know when that happens, so it happens Sunday sometime. Yeah, and then on the other side also, we also split a boot here. Now, this was nowhere near as much. I'm gonna have to find a different boot solution. If you have any ideas, please feel free to leave them in the comments, because obviously we've got the right CV joints at this point, but we definitely don't have boots that last. These boots are too expensive to be using as consumables, and when they go, the joint just kind of gets a lot of accelerated wear, so that might be a couple $100 worth of damage right there. I'm not thrilled about that. I'm super happy that the joints are lasting, but we'll just have to find another solution for the boot. Shouldn't be too hard, right? So let's just get the motor out of this. At this point, there's not really reason to show you guys all the details about this. That's shown in previous videos. Let's just get to the motor out of the chassis. All right, and now we've got the transmission pulled out of the car. Before we open it, it's killing me to know what's inside there, but I wanted to clarify. We've been wearing the, this is just different gear, but we've been wearing the teeth on the synchro, not the actual part of the synchro that's supposed to be working. And at this race, because you'll never learn something unless you experiment, I decided to lower the viscosity of the oil. That way we can make the brass part of the synchro, which is cheaper and easier to replace, wear faster, but give us more traction to be able to bring the gears up to speed so that we don't have to keep replacing the gears themselves. I suspect I might have gone too far. Specifically, I used D4, the Redline D4 ATF, which is, I mean, it says automatic transmission fluid, but it is rated GL4, and this does need a GL4 type fluid, which is designed for manual transmission. So I don't know why it says ATF in the name. It should be rated for it, but the viscosity is way, I mean, it's a viscosity like an automatic transmission fluid, right? It pours like water instead of like gear oil. I suspect that's going to be the issue, but let me unbutton this and open it up and see what we got. Oh! Oh! Wow! Where? You guys got the wrong angle. So I drained the oil earlier, and I was really suspicious because there really wasn't anything in the oil. There was almost no sparkles. Yeah, there's not anything in the oil, but let me show you guys around the other side where the magnet is. And hey, I found fourth gear. Oh my God. It's fourth gear dust. Yeah, that's where the magnet is in the trans, by the way. It does a really good job of catching debris. That's not part of a gear. This piece belongs. Right, well, actually, no. This is that kind of piece, but that's not this one. There's more pieces missing all. Wow. I have never ripped teeth off of a gear. We're only pushing 235 horses here. This doesn't make a ton of sense. I genuinely think that this was just a fluke. I don't think there's anything wrong with this setup. Or it's just, years and years. Well, no, it's not years and years of abuse, because I just replaced this gear because it had worn teeth. Now, I only replaced this one, not the counter gear, that one would have had years of use on it. But I'm going to go on a limb and say that there was a manufacturing defect on this gear. I don't know how to I don't know how to prove that. And if any of you guys have any ideas, I'm all ears. Just put them in the comments. I do actually read all the comments. Well, that's definitely where fourth went. It turned to dust. But this gear here was brand new because we had chipped some of the teeth here. Just as I was talking about here, the teeth here, they were worn out. I didn't replace the counter gear. This one would have had many races on it. This one was new. But of course, if one starts to destroy, it makes sense that the other one just goes with it. I really think, if I had to say, I think that was a manufacturing defect. Obviously, I can't go back to Toyota on that. I'm using it. First of all, I'm using it in a racing application, and I'm not even using it in the vehicle as it was intended for, and I'm using it with more horsepower. But I think that was a manufacturing defect. There might be more clues when I pull the shaft apart, but at this point, the shift feel was an absolute ton better with the lighter weight oil. So I don't think that was a mixed... I don't think that was a bad experiment. I think I'm probably going to step up a little bit from the D4 stuff. I think, what is it, the Redline MTL LV, I think is a step in between where I was before and this stuff. I think I'm going to do that because honestly, the synchros felt great when we were shifting on the track. So, yeah, now this transmission, I don't know if any part of this is going to live again. The bearings are all kind of full of junk. Yeah. But either way, that brings us to the big hole in the block. Actually, 2 holes in the block. Let's get to that. And now let's look at the engine. So there's 2 things we care about here. First, the cause of death. And second are the intake cams. Well, both cams, which are both intake cams from an FXE, in good shape, because that's really the only part here that has any significant cost to it. The motors are dirt cheap, so because of that, let's start with the top. Let's take a look there. All right, so on first glance, they look okay. They do look. I can't feel anything with my finger. They certainly look like they got some wear, and if you look like at the lobes, you can see there's some lines. So that tells me that some debris did float through the motor before the failure, which honestly, it's a bit surprising because the way, essentially the motor didn't go for more than about 1 corner between making any kind of signs that it was about to fail and then completely failing. Literally, it did that in the corkscrew. And just before that, it'll probably show up in Ben's video, but we actually passed the first place car, literally the corner before this all happened. So it was obviously, the motor was still giving out full strength until literally that last corner. I'm going to have to put some thought towards this. I think I'm okay reusing these cams, maybe spend a little bit of time polishing them. The intake phaser, of course, that's getting tossed because there is signs of debris that did go into here, so there's going to be debris in here, and it's not impossible to clean, but they're not expensive enough to be worth trying. And of course, this one here is the exact same cam, except it doesn't have a phaser on it. There's nothing wrong with this phaser. It's completely cleanable. I don't see any signs of debris on the chain. I, of course, won't reuse the timing chain, but this, I think, is perfectly fine to reuse. Yeah. All right. So we've mitigated like 75% of the damage cost. Pretty happy about that. I suppose at this point it's just carnage. So let's I'm going to take the stuff that's all going to fall out when I flip it over, and then flip it over, and let's take a look in the bottom. Oh! Well, that's part of a piston. That's an oil control ring. I believe piston nuggets, right? Oh my God. Wow. At least one of these pistons is just completely disintegrated. I'm quite surprised. Look at that. It's full of forbidden glitter. Oh, piston ring. Yeah, well, that's not getting reused. All right, so obviously there is some debris in here, but this also tells us that's a lot of debris. So the motor was running for a while. It wasn't a sudden catastrophic failure. It just looked sudden. This thing was dying, which also explains, this oil, yeah, this oil got cooked. So yeah, check this out. It's deformed up here. It got hot. Yeah. Is there even a piston down there anymore? Oh, I can see the valves. Yeah, there's no piston there anymore. The number 2 is just completely disintegrated. So if we look at the mains, they're definitely showing wear, but all of those are still serviceable. Not that I'm going to reuse them, but that's definitely not where the damage started in this motor. I apologize. What happened there is I noticed that the number 3 rod was bent, as you can clearly see here. And what I wanted to see is, I wanted to pop the head to see if there was something here that had hit, perhaps something that had come up the intake and then back down there, which is not an uncommon thing to do. Because if there wasn't anything that had hit this piston, then that's really this can only be caused by hydrolock or money shift, and it wasn't even raining, so it definitely didn't hydrolock. That catches you right back up. And now, check this out. So, I noticed the piston is cracked. In fact, let me show you even more clearly. And not only is it just cracked on the top, but if you look over to the side, it's missing an entire chunk there. And if you look here, you can even see there's a little crack there that's starting. But if we look back to the top of the piston here, we can see, well, it had valve contact, right? And this is the exhaust valves, because the exhaust valves are the ones that are closing when the piston's coming up, and if the piston comes up faster and the valves float, then you get some contact. But this is after me running the piston on a wire wheel, because if we look at the 2 other pistons, you can see there was contact also on these pistons, but you'll notice it's covered in carbon. And this one also has the exact same thing going on. You can see these right here. So what's happening here is, now that's a large accumulation of carbon, but keep in mind, there was a crack in a piston here, which was burning oil. One thing I didn't mention earlier, because I didn't realize it was relevant, is on Saturday night, so that was after, 9-ish hours of racing, we had burned 1.5 quarts of oil, which is completely not normal for me. Usually by the end of the weekend, maybe 1/4 of a quart in these motors. I never have to top it off mid-race. It's just never been a problem before. So that was suspicious, but I think we were burning it in here. And of course, I still have the normal crankcase vent system in there. So then that was getting recirculated right back into the intake and resulting in oil burning on here. So we can tell that strike happened well before the engine blew apart. And same thing, if we look at the pistons, you can see there's no more strike mark on here. It's been covered in soot simply because the motor has run for quite a bit since then. Which means, I believe the motor was running like this. And actually, something I just thought of, if there's soot inside this crack, that would absolutely confirm it. So let me go finish off cutting this piston apart. Quick cut with the bandsaw, and let's see what we reveal. Yeah, that's really not as straightforward as I expected. Yeah, well, that's a whole lot of, I don't know. But I'm fairly certain, I'm fairly certain this was running with that crack in the piston. And you can see, right, I just had to make this little cut. It was only holding on with this little part of the piston. And somehow this engine lasted 14 hours like this. So what I'm thinking happened at this point is this crack either happened or at least started on the money shift, and that was on Friday. And that was the last thing we did on Friday, because I proceeded to taking the valve cover off, because when you money shift these motors, they usually throw rockers. So that took us to the end of practice, and then we raced on this thing for 14 hours. And if you look, the piston is sideways, and the wear pattern in the bore shows that this piston was sideways for enough time to establish a wear pattern in the bore. It's crazy to me. Honestly, I can't even be mad. I'm impressed that it lasted this long. This thing basically saved our weekend, because otherwise, right, the motor would have been blown on practice day, and then we would have had nothing to race. Instead, we were racing competitively all weekend. You know, we went all the way up to first within about an hour at the start of the race, and then kind of bounced up and down just a little bit, and then quickly established 4th place. And then on Sunday, we took that 4th place up to 3rd place, and we stayed there just about the entirety of Sunday, up until 40 minutes to the end. And then, of course, this happened. So the takeaway from here, I'm genuinely still happy with the motor. I'm going to keep running this. I don't think I'm going to make any changes to this. The change might be to revise my my money shift lockout. Right now, the money shift lockout only works when you shift to 5th. So that's when it locks out 1st and 2nd. Maybe there's a revision to do there. So other than that, the transmission, I'm going to go with a slightly heavier oil, but I don't think this right here is, I don't think this is a pattern. I've been racing with this transmission here, the EB60 and EB62, depending on what I can find for cheap, since 2009. So that's, and this is the first time that I've done this. Now, I have had to service the actual gears because the teeth wear out every once in a while, but that's expected. That's perfectly expected. So I think I'm going to keep running the exact same thing. Now, if of course this establishes the start of a pattern just because we're pushing it further, then I'll revisit that. But for now, I'm going to stay with this. All right, one more thing to notice. You see that back there? We've got some interesting projects coming that are not MR2 related. So as much as I hate saying this, when I make slightly different content, YouTube is a lot less likely to recommend it to you. So if this interests you, it might be a good idea to subscribe, because otherwise YouTube might just skip you over that one. That's also an interesting project, but that one's a little bit further in the future. All right, have a great day, and thanks everyone. Thanks for being here and watching this.